we look at the countries that are giving out the most greenhouse gas per capita, Australia, Canada, the US, we notice that car culture is prevalent in these countries. Driving to the supermarket, the church, the mosque, the pub, the friend's house. Do we ever consider any other way to get there, or just get in the car? Do we consider the distance and that walking, cycling or taking the bus might be alternative ways to get there? Many of us live this car culture and take it so much for granted that we don't even realise that we do. It's become ingrained into our lifestyle and habits. For those who live the extreme car culture, they drive everywhere without considering any other form of transport. You can tell when such a person is at home because their car is parked outside, and if they're out somewhere then it's not there. And whole families live this car culture. When the children are small, the parents drive them everywhere, to the swimming pool, the kid's birthday party, everywhere. Then when the children are older, around 10 to 17 years old, when they could now be cycling or taking the bus, they're still being driven everywhere. Even as teenagers, the parents live as taxi drivers for their children, when the children should really be independent. Then when the children are old enough to drive themselves, they continue to drive everywhere, taking on the role that their parents had. Compare this to countries where car culture is not prevalent, and you notice that the children are able to travel more independently at a younger age. This car culture has got to stop. Way too much greenhouse gas is being emitted into the atmosphere every day, causing global warming which has already gone way too far. But every time we get in a fossil-fueled car and switch it on, we are adding to an already existing problem. Many of these journeys made by car can easily be made using some other form of transport. We need to learn to break the mold, to think outside the box, to live differently. Walking is ideal for short journeys. Cycling is totally feasible for many others. Many of us, in fact most of us, live in cities and have access to good public transport. There are no excuses to not use them, really. Many people are just not used to travelling that way. They are so entrenched in the car culture. We are now at the point where we absolutely must switch to these other forms of transport. To continue to drive burning fossil fuels is totally selfish and immoral.
We rarely encounter 19th century technology in our lives these days. Most of the technology we use dates from the 21st or the 20th century. The power behind the motor car is the internal combustion engine, whose basic design is pretty much as it was in the 19th century. The combustion of some fossil fuel occurs with air in a combustion chamber. This applies direct force to components to drive the vehicle. Similarly, the basic design of the car has remained unchanged, with a passenger seat in the front next to the driver, and 2 or 3 more passenger seats in the back. Why do we hang on to this same basic technology and design when the technology used for the rest of our lives has moved on? Even when the car is used for one person, we still have this extra width of space that we lug around with us for no actual benefit. This makes cars use a lot of extra road width and space unnecessarily. Cars are incredibly heavy. The average car weighs about 1,500 kilograms, and most of its weight is in the engine. So we have this incredibly inefficient system of transportation, which uses a load of energy mainly to transport its own propulsion system. And in many cases, this vehicle is used just to transport one single person. This is an inefficient form of transportation.
Now the best way to cut down in car usage is to stop owning cars. We have this culture of everybody owning a car. It's not healthy. Because people are owning cars, they are driving them. The kind of thinking is that, okay, I've got a car, so I might as well use it. And also financially,
People are thinking, okay, because I have a car, financially it makes sense to use it. But if we don't own a car, then we'll be much more ready to just jump on a bus or to walk or to cycle these journeys. This is a problem. We've got to break out of this car ownership culture. Now when I give talks like this, people come up with all sorts of excuses to say why they personally cannot give up their car. You know, people talk about, oh, I have a family, I need to drive my kids around, where I live is not going to work, but we've just got to stop making excuses. The time for excuses is over. We're in a climate crisis. What we need to do is find excuses for doing without cars. Now there are a lot of alternatives to cars. Compared with our grandparents' generation, most of us now live in cities. We have experienced over the last 50 years urbanization in many parts of the world. So this means that we are much closer to each other. We're living in cities. That's our lifestyle today. And so this concept of needing a car to drive in to the city from the countryside is a thing of the past. We now live in suburbs where we have ready access to public transport, which is way more efficient than personal cars. Now many car journeys are of just 1 or 2 kilometers in length, and so they're actually way more suited to cycling, and cycling is a very good alternative to driving a car in order just to get about. Even if we do occasionally need a car, there are now many alternatives to actually owning one. So here are some alternatives to actually owning a car. First of all, car co-ops. These are schemes whereby several people get to use the same car. And this works out to be way more efficient as a means of travelling than you having your own personal car that you have to keep parked somewhere while you get on with the rest of your life. So they work in different ways, but for example, one car caring scheme allows you to simply book a car online with your phone for the time that you need it. Then at that time you walk down the street and you pick it up. You then drive it to your destination and lock it up, and then that's it. You've finished with it and it now becomes available for someone else to use. That's one method, but there are many others. There are certain car schemes whereby you have a particular location that you can get to, somewhere that's very convenient, like a railway station or something like that, and that's where cars are kept. And you go and pick up your car for the time that you book it, and then you use it, and that's it. Another method is car rental. Now, car rental companies have been around for many decades, and with these you for example, if you need a car for the weekend, for example you're doing a weekend trip, you just book it online in advance, and then when the time comes you go and collect it from the rental company. And some rental companies will even pick you up from your home. These work out to be very good value, and most of the well-known companies will provide a nearly new car. Even occasional taxi use is a good alternative to owning a car. Though they are expensive, when you combine them with the other cheaper alternatives such as public transport and cycling and walking, you can afford to make the occasional taxi trip when you need to, when you really need it. Even car owners have to make the occasional taxi trip anyway.
Given our current environmental crisis, continuing to drive fossil-fueled vehicles makes no sense. Adding more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere is ludicrous, particularly as we do have alternative ways to travel. We don't need to burn fossil fuels. This is something that we as individuals can do something about. It's primarily about us making the right decisions on how we will travel. So our number one priority would be to walk, if we can. Secondly, to cycle. Bicycles do have the option of having trailers, so that's one way of carrying luggage if that's feasible. We can also consider taking the bus or taking the train. There are lots of other options these days as well. We have e-bikes, e-scooters, small mobility devices that we can use. And then, only then, should we consider using a car. And then it should be an electric car if we really need to use one. We need to be willing to make sacrifices, not excuses.